Hi. So my name is Bill Buchanan, and I lead a podcast series on the world leaders in cryptography. I'm so happy to have here Clifford Cocks, and who is a British mathematician and cryptographer. Hi, Cliff.
Hi, Bill. Hi, good to see you.
Clifford, while working at GCHQ, invented public key encryption, and which predates the work of RSA and the Diffie-Hellman methods. He studied mathematics as an undergraduate at King's College, Cambridge, and then joined the Communications Electronic Security Group, or CESG, at GCHQ in 1973. After his discovery of a usable public key encryption method, he went on to create one of the first identity-based encryption methods, and which is based around quadratic residues rather than bilinear pairings. In 2008, he was made a Companion of the Order of Bath, or CB. Then in 2010, he and James Ellis and Malcolm Williamson were honoured by the IEEE for their part in the development of public key encryption. In 2015, he was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society, and in the same year, he received an honorary PhD from the University of Birmingham. Then in 2021, Clifford was inducted into the Cryptologic Hall of Honour. So, what does a typical day involve for you now?
Well, now I've basically retired. I've sort of finally retired from my sort for my sort of cryptographic work earlier this year. So it's now a sort of a mix of basically sort of volunteering and sort of local community, everything from uh, citizens advice to amateur dramatics to being a treasurer of surprisingly large number of organisations. That's really sort of what I'm doing now. I'm basically retired, which is really quite pleasant in a way. Um,
It's great.
and we're remodeling our house at the moment, which is if you hear noises off, that's it's the builders. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. And you deserve to have such a great retirement. So you were awarded a CB.
Mhm.
What is that award?
Okay, so CB stands for Companion of the Bath. It's one of the sort of a set of awards like MBE and OBE. And this CB is specifically for sort of government service. So that's what it was for. So CB, and in terms of the ranking of honours, it's the one that ranks just below knighthood.
Yeah, wow, that's impressive. Perhaps one day you will get that a
I
knighthood,
doubt it.
hopefully, because the impact that public key encryption has made, it really can't be measured these days. So what got you into cryptography?
Uh, Basically, it was the first job, which was at GCHQ. I mean, was a mathematician. I was studying mathematics, um, and as you mentioned, I started doing a doctorate at Oxford, and somehow the topic just didn't grab me, but I wanted to carry on doing mathematics, and there weren't that many options really for actual employed work outside academia that used mathematics, and GCHQ was one of them. And of course, the mathematics they do there is around cryptography, so that's how I got into the subject.
Yeah. And I think you studied elliptic curves at one
Mm.
time, and elliptic curves didn't really take off until perhaps when Satoshi Nakamoto. I interviewed Neil Kobolitz, who was one of the
Yeah.
co-inventors of elliptic
Hmm.
curves, and he even didn't know the impact that elliptic curve cryptography would actually have. And it was Satoshi Nakamoto who picked it up, used the elliptic curve wallet, and then used the ECDSA signature.
Yeah.
So you must have worked on it before that time. Did you see the potential of elliptic curves at that time?
Uh, well, I mean, the work on elliptic curves was what I was actually doing at Oxford. I was Brian Birch was my supervisor, and yeah, I mean, he had the Boltzmann and Dye conjecture about elliptic curves. So that's kind of the area I was working in, and it was sort of elliptic curves and modular forms, which uh, is one of the key things in the sort of Fermat's last theorem proof. So that was it was the mathematical end of elliptic curves that we were interested in. Um, so yeah, and the idea that it actually had an application to cryptography, that yeah, I mean that really wasn't in my consciousness at the time I was working on the topic. Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know I had at that time, but did not know that it could be used in that way. And of course, it is probably the most commonly used digital signature method these days, ECDSA. Mm.
Yeah, that's right. And ECDSA is a bit unfortunate. It's not the best signature method. It's a bit clunky and cumbersome. So hopefully Peter Schnorr's signature method and the Fiat Shamir method will improve signatures hopefully in the future. So what was your post at GCHQ? And I appreciate you can't tell any of the
Mhm.
details, but what was the team that you worked with there?
Uh, well, I mean, I was as a new recruit, so it was employed as a mathematician to work on. Essentially, I was learning a lot of cryptography, sort of getting up to speed on the topic and on the subject when I first started work there. Um, so, I mean, mathematics has been a key part of how cryptography works right back from the Bletchley Park days, and so we were, continuing that sort of tradition, really.
Yeah. And the current GCHQ base
Hmm.
is now the donut. But
That's
I
right. Oh, yeah.
it's a fairly new.
Mm.
I saw pictures of it being constructed. It must be really amazing. Uh, the the power supplies and the data centers and so on. But where were you actually based? I appreciate you might not be able to
No, no, no.
tell us
It's
too much.
I was based in Cheltenham,
Yeah.
and we had two sites in Cheltenham. And there's one which the donut is now based, and the one on the other side of town. And at that time, they were mostly sort of, but essentially huts that had been built during the Second World War, and so which were being kept going. Yeah, and there was one or two sort of newer buildings, but that was where I was. I was in Cheltenham. Yeah, yeah. Now the donut, as you say, is an amazing, building, and was built to be open plan, and that has had actually quite a big impact on the atmosphere in working in a place. Working in an open plan office is really quite different from individual offices.
Yeah. And what was your first introduction to public key encryption?
Uh, okay, well, that was someone James Ellis, who'd been at GCHQ, CSG for quite a long time. And a few years earlier, one of his jobs was to look at how can you make key management, I think, essentially less expensive. It was becoming an expensive part of delivering keys to increasingly large military nets was getting expensive. Well, it certainly was projected to become an expensive process. Um, and so I mean, he was given the job of suggesting ways in which the way we did this could be improved. Because managing keys, it's a very labor-intensive business. Producing them, distributing them securely, looking after them, and then destroying them securely. And he just came up with this, as well as some conventional ideas, with the suggestion that actually you didn't need to just have any initial shared secret to begin to communicate securely. Um, uh, I mean, his motivation was actually a sort of analog paper from the 1940s he'd read about putting noise onto an analog line, and the person who put it on could take it off, and nobody else could. And he thought, well, why can't we do a digital version of that? And he came up with a sort of schema for how you could do it with essentially one-way functions. But he didn't have a mechanism for it. So there was that problem that was around, and as part of learning the business, I was shown this problem um, by my mentor Nick Patterson, and so that was my first introduction. Was here's a problem, here's a interesting idea. Some people think it's not going to. There's no way it can work. Others have tried and failed. What can you do about it?
Yeah, because there was obviously the work of Shannon on the communication theory,
Mm-hmm.
and I think error correcting codes are now coming back into fashion again.
Mm-hmm.
Macleese created a method in the 1970s, I think, around a key exchange uh, mechanism. So a lot of the theory that was developed around error correction is actually coming back again. So could you quickly outline the method that you came up with for public key encryption? And can you remember the date, around the date that you actually did this?
Yeah, this was well, I joined the organisation in September '73, and this was to be in probably November '73 when I was sort of shown the problem. Um, and so yeah. So because I've been working in number theory essentially, it seemed the first thing I thought of to try as a one-way function was multiplying prime numbers together. And then there was the question of how do you then fit the other bits into the schema that James had come up with. And so, essentially, it came up with the idea that exponentiation was something that you could do, um, but you can only undo it if you do the if you knew the factorization. So
Yeah,
that's really how I came up with the idea. This was first, well, let's try one-way function being multiplication, and then how do we then bootstrap that up to allow the trapdoor element of the process.
yeah. So that is that Fermat's last theorem where you have
No, well,
yeah,
it's his little theorem,
yeah.
not
It's
his
little
last
theorem.
theorem.
That's not
Yeah,
last theorem, it's
yeah,
little
no,
theorem. So
that
a
doesn't
to the
have any
power
applications yet, as far as I know. But
that's
the
right.
little theorem, yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. That it, yeah, yeah, a number to the power p is congruent to itself modulo p, and therefore to the power p minus one is congruent
yeah,
to one, and you can therefore invert an exponentiation modulo a prime very easily if you know the exponent. You just have to
yeah,
find the modular inverse, which is a trivial process.
yeah,
Um, but if you don't know the factors, then essentially being able to recover the multiplicative group modulo a composite number is more or less equivalent to being able to factor the number.
yeah,
So that was the idea. Yes.
yeah.
And yeah. So that was actually done that evening. And again, had the problem because I couldn't write anything down, so I had to make sure I could remember it in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose these were the days before computers, laptops, and things like that. So you probably had to write it down with a pen and paper at that time.
Well, that's right, but I mean, that you, you were not allowed to write anything down,
Mm,
about work,
mm.
outside work. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So we end up with the modulus n, which is p times q, and
yeah.
then we have this message to the power of p minus one times q minus one will give us one, and that allows us to be able to reverse the
The
encryption
exponentiation. That's right.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And what so this was 1973.
Three. Late
Okay,
73.
obviously, so at the time we had the Lucifer, Cypher, we had Des, and so on. I think Lloyds Bank in the UK were one of the first first organizations to use symmetric key encryption
Hmm.
commercially. So it wasn't widely used at the time. And obviously you're saying is it's probably in defense areas that
Well,
encryption was actually used.
that was yeah. I mean that was the motivation for James's work was increasing net sizes. And, we could see that yeah, electronic communication was getting cheaper. You'd be using it sort of further down the hierarchy, and therefore there'll be a lot more keys to manage. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously the Whitfield Diffie and Marty Hellman published their paper in 1976. I think the paper is two parts. If you
Yeah, it
talk to
does. It
Whitfield
is into
Diffie,
yeah,
obviously
yeah.
Whitfield proposed the opportunity for the trapdoor and the public key encryption, but I think it was Marty Hellman who came up with the maths. And I've seen the desk at Stanford where he actually wrote that was 76. And then in
Yeah.
77, you had the breakthrough of RSA, reverse
You may
and
well, yes.
Edelman proposing the first public key encryption method. At the time, what did you know? I mean, that was 3 or 4 years after you had made your discovery.
Hmm.
What did you know of their work?
Um, well, interestingly, the first I knew about that was when I read about it in Martin Garner's article in Scientific American.
Yeah,
I actually was taking a number of years out from working at GCHQ, working in the MOD, so I wasn't in touch at all with the cryptography world at that time. So that was my first awareness of the rediscoveries, if you like, was reading Martin Gardner's article.
yeah. It was an Martin Gardner was such an amazing
Absolutely, wasn't
mathematician. Yeah, and
it? Yeah,
I think that was his classic article that he did. The Game of Life was the other one
yeah.
that he
Yeah, he
did.
popularized that too, John Conway's life. Yes,
Yeah, but
yes,
but but it was a strange story around the RSA article that he had um, that readers could actually send in a stamped addressed envelope, and then the MIT would send out the paper, and I think the NSA perhaps didn't quite like this paper going outside the US and actually tried to pull the paper. So obviously they had some tensions, and I know that
hmm.
that the PhD students who were presenting the work at the time also had problems when they were presenting that they could
Who
have
did
been
sorry?
arrested. I think it was Marty Hellman's student at the
Okay,
time had a problem that he might have been arrested for actually presenting the work around the Diffie-Hellman method,
okay.
and
Mhm.
and there was lots of problems around the IEEE paper that was actually produced at the time. So I know that so there's two methods here. One is is the method like the RSA
I would
method
say,
that you've
yeah,
created, and there's also a key exchange method. So in any secure connection that we have, we exchange the keys using these days elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, and
yeah.
then we might use an RSA signature to be able to prove the other end. So, with the work at Stanford with Whitfield Diffie and Marty Hellman, they published theirs in 1976. I think this had always also been actually invented by Malcolm.
That's right. Yes, yeah. Who's actually a friend of mine from we were at the same school together. Um, and he joined GCHQ a year before me. And actually, at the time I did that work, I was actually sharing a house with him, and I just mentioned that I published a paper, and he was kind of surprised that yeah, I published a paper after only a couple of months at the organisation, and he'd been there a year and hadn't published anything at all. So he had a look, and I think he was actually trying to sort of prove me wrong, and came up with initially a three-part exchange,
Mm,
but and then refined it, which actually communicated a value.
Mm.
and then refined it to the what we now know the Diffie-Hellman exchange, where just two exchanges like that produces a common value, which you don't know what it's going to be, but it's a common value, which is only the two people involved actually know what it is. So yeah, um, and that was done probably it was probably January of the next year, 74, when he actually published internally his work.
Yeah. Okay. And it's like G to the if A has Alice has
Yeah, I mean the basic Diffie-Hellman method is working modulo over prime p. I mean, it can be other groups, but prime p, for example, and you agree some value g, which doesn't really matter for what it is, and what, and then one side has an x and computes g to the x mod p, the other side produces a y and g to the y mod p, and then they can both compute g to the power x y. Whereas if you're observing what goes on, all you see is g to the x and g to the y, and you know g. But recovering g to the xy, which is called the Diffie-Hellman problem,
Mm.
no one's found a better way of doing that than actually solving the discrete log problem. In other words, going from g to the x to x, which
Yeah.
seems to be hard.
Yeah. And it's still important, but obviously the prime numbers are so large now that it can be difficult to use. So elliptic curve came along, luckily, and gave us the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman method, but it's still the same method underneath, and it's still
It
the
is, yeah,
same
yeah, that's
problem.
right. Yes, I mean that method works with any group. It's just just that some groups are insecure.
Yeah. Yeah. And and at the time, this would have been early 1970s. I don't think even the microprocessor was around. You maybe be lucky if you had a 4-bit one. So what were the computers that you actually used at GCHQ at that time?
Well, I mean they were regular mainframe computers, but I mean in those days that's what big computers were. Um, um, yeah, but you're right. I mean these computations were too expensive to use in the way in which it was for the problem that we were trying to solve. Which is why after quite a lot of study, the decision was that it's not yet time to actually implement.
Yeah. So perhaps Whitfield Diffie, Marty Hellman, and the RSA were more lucky because the microprocessor was really starting, the PC was starting to make an impact. So they were probably lucky. Can you remember the sizes of the prime numbers you were using for your work at that time?
Um, well, I think with the case of what size depends on what security level you want, and there was uh, yeah I don't think I'm not sure exactly what we really thought at the time, but don't forget that factoring methods have improved since then. I mean, at the time, the best factoring method was a false root method, spoof off shanks. So
Yeah,
factoring methods have got better. So yeah, and so generally moduli have got larger over time.
yeah. Because I think even in the original RSA paper, they projected that it would take billions of years to crack for the sizes of the prime numbers that they had,
Mhm.
and they had a little challenge for readers at the time, and they thought it was going to be billions and billions of years, but actually these days it would be so easy to crack. So it just shows you the speed up that there has actually been in these methods.
Well, that's right. Well, I mean, speed up in two directions. There's speed up in processing, and there's speed up in the actual methods used.
Yeah. And did you actually know at the time, so this was the early 1970s, did you know at the time that what you had actually created was going to be so significant?
Um, well, we kind of had a sense that this was something completely new that had not been done before. It was a completely new way of communicating securely. So in that sense, but I mean, I personally hadn't sort of wasn't in my consciousness as to how the whole world would become connected in the way it is, and it's that which is really driving the fact that this is used all so kind of universally.
Yeah. And and at the time, so public key encryption can be used to encrypt. So we can take a key and we can
Hmm.
encrypt the key, or we can use it for digital signatures. So most often we use it for digital signatures. Where was your method pitched? Was it in the protection of data, or was it in digitally signing things?
Okay, that was the one thing that we missed at the time. And we knew that authentication was an issue because, if you were to use this method, you'd want some way of being sure that you were actually communicating with who you thought you were communicating with. Um, and in fact, it was well, only when James saw um, Diffie-Hellman's first paper, which actually sort of showed how you could use these methods if you could find one to produce a signature. And you realize that actually we already had all that we needed to produce signatures. So although we had the mechanisms, we were a little bit late in realizing that actually you can use these methods to produce a signature. So
Yeah,
it had been designed as a communications rather than as a authentication tool.
yeah, because you just flip the keys really with the RSA method, and that now
Well, that's the point. Is that the functions of D for decrypt
Mm,
and E for encrypt, they commute. Yeah,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so yeah. So if you reverse the order, you get authentication rather than encryption.
yeah. And when did GCHQ finally reveal the discovery of your public key encryption method, and why did they do this?
Um, okay, well they did it it was in the late 1990s, 97, I think. Um, and it was because I was about to give some public talks on at a conference on some mathematics we'd just been recently doing. Um, and by that stage, it was kind of an open secret that that Malcolm and I and James had been involved in the discoveries in the early days, and so it seemed the right time to go public on what was basically something that was pretty well known already, actually, or just never formally avowed.
Yeah. And do you think it was right? I know this is a really difficult question. Do you think it was right for GCHQ to keep these methods a secret while the rest of the
I,
world was using the other methods?
well, it wasn't. Well, I'm not sure that in that sense, we kept anything secret. I mean, when we came up with the ideas, yeah, we looked pretty hard at what you know, practicality of implementing it. Decided that actually it wasn't time yet for it, and was put in abeyance. Um, and then by the time it was ready to be used, I mean, it was already discovered and it was already out there in the public domain, and so there really wasn't anything for us to do in terms of you know, putting it out there because it was already out there.
Yeah. And and how did GCHQ initially use your work? I know this can be a little bit sensitive for confidentiality, but where was your work actually applied?
Um, okay, well, I mean, obviously, one of the first things you want to do with it is a telephone system. I mean, that's kind of an obvious one, and that was, I think, was one of the first sort of developments in the public domain was to use it in a secure telephone system. Um, so I guess that's really where it was first implemented in that, internally.
Yeah. And would that be to protect a key, to protect a symmetric key, or was public key encryption actually used to encrypt the data in the telephone system?
Oh, I see. I don't think you hardly ever want to use public key for encrypting a large amount of data. I mean, it's an expensive process. So once you've got your keys, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of choice as to for secure symmetric encryption. I mean, these days, of course, AES is the dominant method. So, I mean, why would you want to use public key to encrypt a large amount of data? That doesn't really make a lot of sense, really. So, yeah, you clearly want to use a symmetric system if you're encrypting the data once you've established your keys.
Yeah. And at the time, did you think that cryptography was going to be used at all outside defense applications? Did you see? I mean, I appreciate we had the Lloyd's Bank using
Hmm.
it in the
Yeah,
first
yeah,
ATMs.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think banking had always been one of the um, places that had been used cryptography. Um, well, certainly when I joined GCHQ, they, there was very little academic cryptography. I mean, almost all cryptography was done by governments, basically. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it's the obviously the way around now. I mean, there's been a mushrooming in the study of cryptography, public study of it. Um, so, yeah, I mean, at the time, cryptography was very much a thing for governments and a few other niche organizations.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
obviously the work. Yeah,
to carry on.
yeah. There was obviously people like Fred Piper working
Hmm.
at Raw Holloway. There was work at Cambridge, the professor there, and I know that you worked at Bristol too. So were they some of the first organisations that were really starting to work with GCHQ and on cryptography?
Uh, not, well, I mean, what I think what happened was cryptography became sort of an academic subject, and a lot of places sort of started up with that, and there were obviously there were other organisations like defence organisations that um, started to use it as well. So yeah, I mean, yeah, my work at Bristol was involved with setting up the Harbon Institute there, which came
Is it?
much later. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that you were keen to build bridges between intelligence
Hmm.
agencies and academia. What are you most proud of the things that you achieved with that?
Um, well, certainly creating or helping design and then create the Harbon Institute, I think is probably the main one. Yeah, trying to find a formula that allows that works for academics to come in and contribute on internal problems, and at the same time, continue and be part of an academic career if that's what they want. Um, um, it's what we said, it's been there for, well, over 15 years now, and it seems to be a stable model for how it works, which is good.
Yeah. And academia wasn't for you. I mean, why did you take that jump from academia
Hmm.
into
Um,
defense?
well, okay, as I say, it was very much the topic. Probably what I could, an alternative would have been to have taken a year out and gone back into doing it. But I guess I got a little bit of sort of burnout when it came to um, mathematical study, and the topic I've chosen. There was really quite a large gap between what we'd learned as an undergraduate and where you had to get to before you could start doing any new research. And that I wasn't really prepared for. So yeah, it was that made me think, I'm not sure I really want to spend the next 3 years doing this. And once, and what that certainly at that time, maybe still true. Once you jumped out of academia, it was very hard indeed to get back in.
Mm. Yeah. And so after your public key encryption method, what other methods? I know that some of this might be classified and secret, but what did you work on after your public key encryption invention?
Um, well, I had a sort of normal, varied career, really. I mean, I did take some years out to do operations research in the MOD, and then it's you know, a whole mix of sort of different problems that as part of a normal GCHQ career, sort of moving up gradually into sort of more management and mentoring and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so ending up really as a sort of chief mathematician, which I was for a few years.
Wow, that's impressive. And do you still love mathematics? Is that have you become tired of it?
Well, what happens is as you get older, basically, you lose the ability to come up with new ideas. Um, and yeah, so I am afraid I'm not really an active mathematician anymore. Um, yeah, um, I mean that's partly why there's a sort of minute if you want to sort of stay active in research, there's a kind of minimum amount of time you've got to put in to keep on top of an area and keep going. That gets harder, and the rewards in terms of new things that you can think of get less. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I'm afraid I'm not really an active mathematician anymore.
yeah. And identity-based encryption was seen as a great alternative in that I don't have to give you my public key. You could use my identity, my email address or something like that, and we could use
That
a
was the idea of it, yes.
yeah,
Yeah, obviously it's got to be within a structure where yeah, there's like a company or whatever, because someone has to be able to give you your secret key,
yeah,
has the ability to produce it for you, tell you what it is, um, from your public key. But yeah, that was the idea. And of course, it was something that Shamir had proposed as a problem, and he'd come up with a, a, um, a signature scheme that was identity based, but he couldn't find a encryption scheme that was identity based. Um, I rather feel that by the time we came up with the idea, so I came up with the one based on quadratic residues, and then of course there's the one based on pairings. That the world had become so connected that actually and so online that the need uh, for identity-based encryption was nothing like as great as it was had it been discovered 10, 15 years earlier. Um, and of course, the pairings method, pairings have got so much other functionality as well. It can be used for so many different things.
yeah. And I mean the problem with pairings is that we haven't found a post-quantum equivalent for them
No,
yet. So it's
indeed, yeah, uh, because pairings are based on elliptic curves, and this elliptic curve discrete log problem is one of the ones that a quantum computer could break. Yes, as of
yeah.
course with quadratic residues, because that's based on factoring, and uh, that's also breakable.
That's right. So you have Elgamal, RSA, and elliptic curves all broken by
Yep.
quantum computers, which is obviously a worry. And now we have maybe 5 or 10 years to be able to migrate away from the methods that you and your team
Mhm.
created. Is that a worry for critical national infrastructure in the UK and across the world? I mean, what's the I,
As you probably know, I mean, NIST have had an open competition to find alternatives, um, and those alternatives have now had an awful lot of scrutiny, and there are a small number of approved algorithms there for for post-quantum cryptography, both for authentication and for um, key encapsulation. So, I mean, they're not nothing like drop-in replacements. I mean, they tend to have much larger key sizes, for example,
Mm.
um, communication sizes. But certainly there are there are alternatives now which are practical. But there's only all that's left is the question of when do you decide to do your migration?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, and it's likely to
Um,
be a hybrid method that we'll be using in the short term. Certainly for key exchange, we now see Kyber being
mhm.
proposed, which is a latticed method. And you're
Yep.
right, it's much larger key sizes. They still sit in a TLS packet, which is quite good, but they'll have this overhead of supporting both elliptic curve and lattice at the same time.
Yep.
And then with signatures, there'll be double signing ECDSA, and dilithium will probably be signing the same message.
That well, that makes a lot of sense because certainly if you're worried about the fact that the quantum resistant algorithms have not had the same level of scrutiny as and yeah, there might just be some hidden weakness there. Um, then yeah, doing it all twice is belt and braces, basically. Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
And, and we also have Grosvenor's algorithm, which might crack symmetric
Grover's
key
algorithm.
and
Yeah.
hashing.
Well, I mean, that's basically square. That's a square root attack,
Mm.
and of course it works on absolutely anything, um, any search process. But that's just a matter of doubling your key length. So, I mean, the symmetric algorithms like AES can fairly easily cope with relatively minimal extra overhead of the doubling of key size.
Yeah. And I
So
think
yeah, that isn't, I think, anything like the same worry as the
mm,
um, yeah, Shor's algorithm and the implications of that.
yeah. And in the US, I think the NSA and some other agencies are moving forward in deprecating our existing public key encryption methods and are looking for organizations to start to look at this new post-quantum cryptography. Do you think the GCHQ and the NCSE will start to lead on this in the UK for our critical national infrastructure?
Yeah, I'm really out of that area now. I mean,
Mm.
I'm not sure I could. I don't think I can
Yeah,
speak for them on what their plans are, honestly.
yeah, yeah. But I think they have the credibility, I think, in the track records to lead it in the UK.
Hmm.
I
Sure.
wouldn't think the politicians would know one end of a quantum computer from another one. So I would hope that the technical excellence from GCHQ especially would really push this forward because there's the worry of a store and forward, a store now and crack in the future
Well,
is a
that's
worry.
yeah. I mean, it's you're right. It's communications where you're worried about long term
Yeah.
um, security that you need to yeah you most need sort of belt and braces and
Mm.
yeah and to prepare. That's true.
Yeah. And so, do you think it's better for a researcher to work in industry or in law enforcement or than working in a university? What if say a PhD student graduates, where probably are they best to grow their career?
Well, that's such a personal question, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah,
Uh, I mean, yeah, I mean, academia has its challenges in terms of forging a career, and it's has its benefits and opportunities too. Um, I mean, they tend to be different careers. I mean, there are it's sometimes possibility of kind of working in both worlds. Uh, but no, I mean, both have their benefits, both have their yeah. frustrations. Yeah, that is just such a personal question, depending on yeah, one's personality and one's interests. Um,
yeah,
but I mean, I guess if you're passionate about a subject, then obviously you want to carry on that in that subject. But
yeah,
um, yeah,
yeah.
no, I don't think there's a single answer to that. It's just a
No,
totally personal
yeah.
question.
I think there is an increase now in cryptography with more academics and researchers working with industry
Mm.
directly, and I think that's a very healthy thing because you can come up with the greatest cryptography method ever. If it doesn't have an impact, it doesn't have a route to market, then it's not going to go anywhere. So I think it's very healthy just now to see a lot of academics actually spending their time in industry and really understanding some of the pressures that there
Yeah,
are.
yeah, I think I agree with you. Well, certainly on the with a topic that's as applied as cryptography, then yes, then
Mm.
there is benefit in doing that. Yes. I thought you were making a more general question about sort of academia in general, as a mathematician, for example. Then,
No, yeah, I mean, I think at the one end you have mathematics, which tends to look more at blue skies work and doesn't see the application. So when sometimes you hear at the school level, a maths teacher might say, I don't know what applications I could give kids to make it relevant. And you say, well, why don't you look at a key exchange and digital signatures?
yes, I mean that was yeah. I mean that yes, I mean the idea that number theory actually has a practical application was right up until yeah, yeah right up until the 70s was yeah would have been seen as well surprising. As you know, Hardy
Yeah,
was actually quite proud of the fact that his subject was one that had no possible application.
yeah, that's true. And do you have any regrets in your career? Anything you would have changed?
Uh, no, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously, you sometimes think, what would it have been like if I had stayed on at Oxford and I had finished a PhD and had an academic career? But I've really thoroughly enjoyed what I have done. So, no, I haven't. You shouldn't have regret. Yeah, as they say, no, I have no regrets.
Yeah. And sometimes cryptography has been held back by patenting. If you look at
Mhm.
RSA was patented, and I think MIT protected the patent. And then
Mhm.
obviously we had the spin-out company,
Yeah.
RSA, which became very successful and made the team a lot of money. Whitfield Diffie, Marty Hellman patented, but they didn't make as much on theirs. I don't know if there's a difference between Stanford and MIT, but there have been some advancements. Peter Schnorr's uh, signature
Mhm.
method held back the industry for a while. So, what's your opinion on patenting cryptography methods? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
Um, well, I don't think. I mean, patenting doesn't prevent sort of research and extra knowledge. It only does give the inventor a potential, um, yeah, for some recompense. I mean, because when we did actually look at patenting, our ideas back in the 70s. And at the time, we were told it's mathematics; it can't be patented. I mean, I think we now
Mm.
know how to do it, which is
Yeah,
essentially you don't patent the mathematics; you patent a device that incorporates the mathematics. Um, so, and that of course implies that you're not actually holding back the subject. I mean, you're basically trying to gain a benefit from the discovery, but you're not actually stopping research or new understanding.
yeah. I suppose the DSA patent that was created was assigned to the US
Mhm.
government. So, and that didn't hold DSA back. And then ECDSA was a kind of modification of,
Yeah,
of, of
indeed.
DSA,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and that was published work. So I think in some cases it doesn't have to be commercialized, and it gives you some protection, especially for SMEs, small businesses, to be able to go into the market and can be protected
Hmm. Yeah.
against some of these big patents. So if you were a new researcher now, what problem do you think you would be addressing?
Oh, I do not know. I, I mean, there's clearly more mileage in trying to find, I use the word better, quantum resistant. If you want, in cryptography, that is, quantum resistant algorithms. I mean, yeah, ones which are more compact, maybe even with some other security guarantees, different methods. So, I mean, I don't think that subject's played out by any means. I think there's more work to be done there. Um, um, yeah, I mean, I think that's perhaps. What about your ideas? What do you think?
Oh,
What
for
have
the
you?
future. I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, zero knowledge proofs have got some
Yeah,
mileage to go in that.
that's true. Yeah, you're right. There are, yeah, yeah. There certainly more applications you could use. Yeah, for that.
Yeah.
That's very true. Yes.
And obviously, trusted hardware. So one approach is to use secure enclaves and so on.
Hmm.
But obviously, there should be better methods to be able to
Yeah,
trust that the piece of hardware that we have is the hardware that
okay.
we can identify.
Yes. And another one area, of course, is fully homomorphic encryption. I mean,
Yeah.
and maybe better methods for multi-party computation. I mean, there's potential there for, yeah, doing interesting things
Yeah.
if you can improve those methods. Yeah, making controlling the way in which you implement data while keeping a control over ownership and so on.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because that's the holy grail, really. We protect data over the air and at rest, but it's in memory. That's always been the biggest problem. And obviously, homomorphic encryption will give us that opportunity that we could start to process and not reveal any of the
Well,
data.
that's right. And the other thing that you tend to that's increasingly important is um, allowing your data to be used, but controlling exactly how it's used.
Mm.
In terms of aggregation, maybe, or yeah, allowing your data to be used in some way to train train AI. And cryptography can potentially have a role there in making sure that the controls are implemented in the way that you think they're being done.
I agree completely. The public key that you use for homomorphic encryption can only be used with a certain contract, a certain processing, and
Yeah.
only if you have the private key can you actually decrypt it. So you're right. Uh, you can't cross-fertilize with these keys. So if I get your homomorphic encryption for your blood pressure, then you can't actually into a into a contract with other blood pressure values that are encrypted. You can't use that with data that's been used, but with another public key. So I think in terms of citizen privacy, then homomorphic encryption really gives you that opportunity to make sure
Mhm.
your data isn't used for many purposes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And and obviously GCHQ, there's always been this tension between law enforcement, defense agencies, and academia, really. They called it the crypto wars for a while. And I think a lot of the initial versions of TLS created by Tahir El Gamo, he was one of
Mhm.
the ones that created it.
Yeah.
It was it had uh, it was crippled in some sort of way because of these export restrictions that the US actually had. So as we get more and more encryption and more cryptography, more end-to-end encryption, how will an agency like GCHQ still be able to keep? This is a big question. I don't think there's an answer to this one. But how do you think law enforcement agencies will still be able to listen to bad people doing bad things?
I'm not sure that's really an area I want to go in. I mean, mentioned the crypto wars.
Mm,
I mean, yeah, I mean that was a kind of a difficult adjustment period. When cryptography was moving from being centered on governments to being centered in academia. Um, um, but I think those are way in the past now. I mean, um, um, but in terms of that final question of yours, I think that's the question not for me, but for the organisations concerned.
yeah, it's a difficult one, and I don't think we're ever
Mhm.
going to solve it because you've
Mhm.
got the protection of society, but you've also got the protection of the citizens' rights to privacy. I think
Mhm.
the increasing use of end-to-end encryption is obviously going to cause a lot of problems for defense agencies and increasingly. And I suppose it's the organizations which actually create these end-to-end encryptions need to understand the scope that they have and how they can work to also protect our society too. Well, thanks very much for the chat today. I really appreciate you taking time out, and all the best for the building work going on in your house. And I hope you have a
You.
great retirement. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye.